Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and there's an alarm going off in my building. I've had to wait several hours to try to do these Q&As, and hopefully I can filter it out enough I can still hear it in the room, but I've set the acoustics up enough that hopefully I can filter it out of this microphone, and if not, I really apologize, but it's been going off for about 18 hours, and it's not really much else I can do about it other than just skip the Q&As for the week, and a lot of people will be upset. So let's go ahead and try to do this anyways. First question. Any calf training tips for someone with horrible calf genetics? Do you train them just like any muscle group and apply progressive overload? Or do you do some special training method for them? Calves are just like any other muscle group in how they respond to training. There's myths about that because of their endurance-related properties. Well, the truth is, they respond like any other muscle group in terms of growth stimulus, but there is a massive genetic component to calves. They're very much a genetic related muscle, meaning there's not much you can do about changing their size more than a few inches. So people who have just fewer muscle fibers in their calves, which again is a genetic trait, are going to struggle to grow them, and people who are born with more are going to grow them really easy. However, the basic ideas do apply. The exact same principles apply: progressive overload and frequency, particularly for drug-free guys. Guys who aren't on any drugs need to train calves frequently. What I would recommend is that if your calves are really a lagging muscle for you, you need to train them probably almost every day. 5 or 6 days a week would be reasonable, with moderately heavy weights, something in the 8 to 10 rep range, going almost to failure. 1 or 2 sets should be all you need, because again, that's most of your growth right there is going to come from your first set or two. But because you're not quite going to failure and you're not doing large amounts of volume, they're going to recover quickly, and they tend to recover fast anyways because of the endurance nature of calves. So train them every day, keep them in that range, and that should be enough to start stimulating growth. But the thing that you need to realize, nothing ever happens fast. No muscle grows quickly for people who aren't on drugs, and definitely a muscle that's a genetically lagging muscle group for you, that's going to be a problem. But if it's really important to you to grow that muscle, it would be worth your time to do something like that if it really matters that much to you. For most of us, it really doesn't. We're just going to be happy with whatever calves we get. If we're not competing in something physique related, we're going to get most of our growth from our deadlifts and squats. And then if you really want bigger calves, you can do some isolation work. But definitely do that. And if you want to rotate through standing exercises, which are going to work the gastrocnemius more, versus seated exercises, which are going to work the soleus more. But remember, both types of exercises work both. There's just more of an emphasis. Then you could totally do that to try to get them balanced out. It's really not a bad idea, so give that a try. All right, next question. What books regarding training would you recommend? A few that I've been looking at and I'm especially interested in your opinion, are Scientific Principles of Training, Science and Practice of Strength Training, and The Art and Science of Lifting. The only book that I know of out of there is the middle one, but keep in mind, I don't read many training books anymore. I've read most of what I consider the good material I need, tons of exercise science textbooks, a few other books. I don't pick up new books on the topic these days because outside of doing some basic studies and looking at what coaches are doing out there, there's not really much else that we need for 99.9% of lifters to give them the advice they need. So I don't really read new books on the topic. So the middle one's a good one, though. Not familiar with the other two that you mentioned, but the 2 books that I do generally recommend that I think should be in every single lifter's library is going to be Practical Programming and Super Training. I consider those to be essential. Those are books that everyone should read who lifts weights and is actually serious all about their training. Those should be your 2 go-tos, in addition to whatever books you want, including old exercise science textbooks, which you can oftentimes pick up used on Amazon, eBay, places like that. You don't necessarily need a lot of books to learn most of what you need to know about training and training programming and basic technique. All right, next question. Hey Jason, longtime fan, but I've been busy with life in a new country. How are your plans for breaking the 181 Texas records going? Wow, brother, you really have been away a long time. Actually, I announced approximately a year ago. Even though I had quit powerlifting, I thought about for a little while I was going to go back in and try to break the Texas state records in those classes because they seemed obtainable, because I had dropped down into the 190s. I was at 192, 193 at one point. Coming back to the US, but what I found is that even doing cardio and stuff for me these days, maintaining a body weight that low is really just insufferable, in the sense of going to bed starving every single night is just not something I'm comfortable with. And I realized quite some time back that I'm not really wanting to compete in powerlifting anymore. I don't really enjoy the idea of competing in strength sports anymore. I like lifting weights. I love lifting weights. It's something I'm passionate about. I enjoy doing. I think everyone should do it for their health and fitness, but I just don't have the drive and the passion to try to compete again. I felt like when I did my competitions before, I was proving something to myself after being sick a really long time. I achieved my goals. I got what I wanted, and I realized that at this point, competing further when I'm not even passionate about competing is just subjecting myself to injury risk and maybe trying to impress people on the internet. And that doesn't fulfill me in any way. I got what I wanted out of competition. So just trying to impress other people isn't going to fulfill me any further, and it doesn't really matter to me at the end of the day. So I totally dropped that goal and idea like a year ago, and I really haven't looked back when it comes to competition. If I compete in something else again in the future, it will be firearm related, not weightlifting. All right, next question. Can getting older really make you gain weight straight away, or is it a gradual progression? I have changed nothing in terms of activity, workout structures, macros, etc. over the past 2 weeks, and yet the scale has shot up 2 kilograms in 2 weeks. I turned 22 last month, and part of me is thinking I'm just getting older, and that's why. All right, first of all, you're 22. You're not getting older. When we talk about metabolism starting to slow down, we're talking about something like a 1% change in metabolism over several years, starting after you turn 25, not when you turn 22. And by 1% meaning, yeah, you might be burning 3,000 calories a day with your activity at 25, and it drops to, 2950 when you turn 30. We're talking, again, not even enough difference that if you maintained the exact same numbers that you would gain even a pound a month. So your 2 kilograms in 2 weeks is most likely some sort of water weight, some sort of transient fluctuations. And 2, you can't perfectly track your activity. You might think that you're doing the same amount of activity, but your non-exercise induced activity and caloric burn is absolutely going to vary several hundred calories a day, no matter how closely you track everything. So you can't really do that perfectly. Also, I'm already concerned about you, the fact that you're freaking out over a 2 kilo shift in water weight, as someone who says they've been tracking their macros really closely a long time. I'm not a fan of the macro tracking like that. I think it leads to eating disorders. And I'm concerned when you're freaking out a little bit over some water weight fluctuations as someone who tracks their macros closely. These things don't really matter that much at the end of the day, as long as you know you're not tremendously overeating and you didn't just throw in an extra 500 or 600 calories a day every day somewhere. You probably didn't gain a significant amount of fat in 2 weeks' time. It's just stress and cortisol and transient shifts in water weight most likely. But if you're that concerned about it, you might want to start watching your behavior and what you do with your training a little more closely, because you could be, I'm not saying that you are, but you could be the type of person who is in danger of developing eating disorders and body image disorders as a result of what you're doing. And it's something you want to keep an eye on a little more closely. And if you need to, maybe go talk to a counselor about it so that you don't develop some type of problem. All right, next question. Can you explain about fat cells being created when you gain fat, and if they are only shrunk or completely destroyed when cutting? Also, is it easier to gain fat when you have more fat in the past due to merely shrunken, not destroyed fat cells? All right, this is something that's been espoused by scientists and things that they found, but it doesn't necessarily mean that this is the cause of why people gain or lose fat faster or slower. Yes, we know that if you become obese, you see a multiplication in your fat cells, but it doesn't mean that you have more body fat than if the cells didn't split. It just means that they have more surface area on the cells. So what that actually means is that they transport energy across that cell barrier easier because you have more surface area, which could, in theory, mean you could gain more fat easier, maybe, but the same logic would dictate that the barrier works the other way too, so you could gain fat more quickly as well, because your fat cells just multiplying allows them to transport easier back and forth. Now, you're still dealing with energy balance either way. Either one of those scenarios, the way you look at it, whether that matters or not, it's still about energy balance. If you're not eating enough to gain fat, you're not going to gain fat. If you're not, and if you're in a calorie deficit, you're going to lose fat at pretty much the same rate, no matter what with that. There are a lot of other factors going on with people who struggle to lose body fat who've been fat and things before, and a lot of it has to do with, from what we can tell now, more to do with hormones like leptin and ghrelin and appetite issues more than anything else. It's not so much down at the molecular level of the fat cell like you're thinking of with the membranes and the size of the various fat cells. Because remember, if the cells are splitting, it's not creating more fat, it's just creating more cells with the same total amount of volume. You just have a larger number of smaller fat cells. But what we are looking at is, again, potential leptin, ghrelin, other hormones that affect appetite and will cause you to binge eat, overeat, things like that. Those are the real concern there as far as people who've previously been very fat who lost weight, is that they may have a lifelong struggle with appetite-related hormones. And that's a big deal, more so than what you're talking about with the cell membranes. All right, next question. Jason, do you think a diabetic person could benefit from a ketogenic diet? Honestly, it doesn't matter what I think on this one. There have been plenty of dietitians out there and medical doctors over the years who have successfully treated people with type 2 diabetes with ketogenic diets. So the answer is obviously yes. It's successfully proven in the past to work. Is it necessarily the best? Well, we don't know. We could argue a lot about the data regarding what diets work best for treating diabetes, particularly type 2 diabetes. But any diet that helps you manage your refined sugar intake, that can impact insulin resistance positively and helps you lose body fat, is going to improve type 2 diabetes. And ketogenic diets have been found in many people to do exactly those things, just like other various types of diets have been found to do those things that are successful in treating diabetes. So it absolutely can work. Is it the best tool? Maybe, maybe not. Probably not. But can it be an effective tool for this? Yes, absolutely. And there have been plenty of documented cases of it doing so. So it's not really even up for debate. It absolutely can work for this. My opinion simply isn't needed. All right, next question. Hey, Jason, I wanted to ask you if I could train first thing in the morning on an empty stomach. I work for almost 12 to 13 hours a day and don't get time to train during the day and even in the evening. Will it affect my strength on the main list? And if yes, what can I do to maintain or increase it? Thanks, bro. You're doing a really great job by helping others. Cardio, it's probably okay. In fact, I've been doing fasted cardio every morning myself lately. But as far as weight training goes, no. Most of the data we have shows that if you're not eating any carbs before you train, it is going to impact your strength gains. It is going to impact your progress and the workloads you can handle in the gym. Not even subject to debate. So you probably need to be eating some carbs before you go in, unless you're on some sort of ketogenic style diet, and that's a whole nother matter. But if you aren't, you absolutely need to be getting some carbs in of some type before you train. They could be something really simple. It could be pretty much anything. I don't even need to recommend anything. Most foods have carbs in them. Eat something before you train. Otherwise, yeah, you're absolutely going to limit your progress and your gains. There's no reason you can't eat something quick on your way to the gym. Even if you're working 12-hour days, you still have time to eat. You may not have time to always cook what you might want, but you always have time to eat. You have to drive. You have to do things. It doesn't take that long to just put 300 or 400 calories in your mouth. It really isn't that big of a deal. Eat something before you train. Don't shortchange yourself. Again, unless you don't really care about maximum results. And if you don't, then that's not a big deal either. Then, go ahead and train fasted. If you're just really not hungry and it's not that big of a deal to you and you don't mind 5% slower progress, then no big deal. But if you do, then yeah, you should definitely eat something first. All right, next question. Hey Jason, would you regard light jogging as HIIT cardio or LISS cardio? I'm currently cutting. We don't need any of that. I'm wondering if I could do light jogging on the treadmill instead in order to improve my endurance, or if this would hinder recovery or even make me lose muscle as you suggested in one of your videos. Thanks. Things are usually relative to where you start. For someone who has no cardio, meaning they don't do any cardio, light jogging might be considered high intensity. But for anyone who's been doing cardio for a couple of weeks, light jogging is always going to be LISS cardio, maybe moderate intensity, but again, you've got to be pretty out of shape for it to be considered moderate intensity cardio. So the answer is absolutely LISS. HIIT cardio is when you pretty much have short bursts of maximum effort cardio, to where you would break into a full sprint, not a jog. You would run as hard and as fast as you could for 20 or 30 seconds. And then you would back down for a minute or two to a light jog again. That would be HIIT. And so again, understanding the difference there, light jogging, by its very nature, the name itself, light, is going to be low intensity cardio. So that's going to fall back in the area of LISS. And yeah, as long as you're keeping the workloads reasonable, the total endurance work you're doing reasonable, it shouldn't affect your strength negatively. And if it does, it will only be in the short term. It's not something that's going to negatively affect you in the long term. You'll see maybe a short-term reduction in strength, but then over time it'll increase and go back the other way as you improve work capacity and you improve recovery as a result of doing the lighter cardio. All right, next question. Jason, let's say I have been lifting for a few years and would be considered an intermediate lifter. If I were to take a considerable amount of time off and lose most of my strength, basically deconditioning my body, and then start to lift again, would I be a beginner again in terms of my gains, or would my body revert back to slow progress as I already was an intermediate lifter? Well, without a time frame, I can't tell you anything. What I will say is that usually, as far as muscle memory goes, it's been kind of overhyped a bit. If you detrain all the way back to the point you were as a novice starting a lifter, you're going to go back to being a novice lifter, and you're going to have to spend that 6 months to a year re-getting out of that phase. But again, that's if you take several years off. If you just take a month or two off, you're basically going to revert back to that much deconditioning. And so if you revert back to mid-novice level numbers, you're going to be a mid-level novice again. It's pretty straightforward. However, I will add the caveat that some lifts and some muscles do seem to come up really quickly in the first few weeks to the first month. And it varies a lot depending upon the person. But usually I think muscle memory's been overhyped other than short bursts when you first come back. Again, the main strategy is to just not let yourself decondition to that point. And if you do, then you just accept those losses, meaning if you take 3 years off from the gym, it's going to take you a while to rebuild. And like in my case, I took over 3 years off from training for medical reasons. I spent 10 months sick in bed. And I noticed a lot of people argue that I changed it. I've pretty much been saying 10 months for 3 years straight, so I'm not sure where people are getting that mixed up. But that is the case, 10 months. When I came back to training, all my upper body stuff came back really, really slow. My lower body came back pretty quick. Like I hit a 500-pound deadlift again, I think somewhere around 10 months to a year after I got back in the gym. But I hit a 500 deadlift before I hit a 200-pound bench again. So it's really kind of comical to me personally in that regard that I was deadlifting 500 pounds again and still struggling to get to that 200 or 205 bench press. So for me, I noticed the lower body lifts came back a lot more quickly than the upper body did. So it seemed like I went back to intermediate levels on things like squats and deadlifts really, really fast. I would say within a year, less than a year, but it took me over a year to really get out of the novice phase on the upper body lifts again. So these things are going to vary depending on the person, but the overall consensus is that you'll come back a little faster than you did the first time around, maybe due to old motor pattern relearning, due to the fact that you know more about training than you did the first times through. You usually have a better grasp on things, and so your previous experiences are going to help you more, along with some basic motor unit learning that will return. You know, the idea of riding a bike. Once you learn to ride a bike, you can't unlearn it. But in terms of you regaining everything really, really quickly, that's not always going to be the case other than just that initial burst. But again, it's going to depend on how far you let yourself detrain. There's a difference between detraining for a couple of months versus detraining for several years. All right, next question. Hey Jason, what are the best exercises to become more explosive? Pretty much explosive lifts. Now, some people are going to argue about Olympic lifts, but I'm going to remind people while Olympic lifts are very explosive, they also have a very highly technical and skill component that isn't necessary and itself doesn't actually contribute to your explosiveness. So doing the Olympic lifts are best to get better at the Olympic lifts, but for the amount of effort and learning you have to put in, they're not going to make you any more explosive than other explosive lifts. The things that are going to make you the most explosive lifts that utilize your whole body or most of your body, starting from a dead stop and using explosive power. So it's going to be things like deadlifts, power cleans, push presses, clean and press, pendlay rows, any sort of pause pressing, or even paused squats of any type, going really, really deep. Those are the things that are going to make you more explosive overall. Anything that can utilize as much muscle mass in your body as possible, utilizing a dead stop training at some point in the exercise that requires you to generate a large amounts of bar speed. So those lifts are going to be the lifts that are going to make you the most explosive for the same amount of effort and learning curve that you put into them. All right, next question. Thoughts on physique and self-induced anorexia? I see it at the gym all the time. This seems to be a bit worse than what bodybuilders do because the physique guys don't need to build any muscle to compete. It's more like take some tren and eat 1,500 calories and you can compete. Well, your point about just the tren and 1,500 calories is a bit reductionist. There's a bit more to it than that, obviously, but I do understand the point you're trying to make there with that hyperbole. In some ways, there is an element of truth to what you're saying there. And yeah, the whole physique thing that's being promoted with the ultra ripped look, I think it does promote anorexia, and we are seeing a lot of unhealthy behaviors coming out of that. And it is really sad that we're seeing that in the fitness industry, because the focus is being put upon this purely aesthetic standard that may or may not always be considered aesthetic, as lean as some of the guys are trying to get. But at least it's a direction back towards the classic physiques that you see with the Greek statues and things, and at least there's a stronger health component to that than what we're seeing with bodybuilding, because it's not quite as unhealthy. But yeah, the emaciated look and self-induced male anorexia is a big problem. It's something I talk about a lot on my channel, which you know if you watch my other stuff. And yeah, it is a problem, and it is something that we need to try to push people away from. I would much rather see people promote general health and fitness than this ultra ripped look that's becoming more popular, just like we saw with the whole waifishly thin model thing in females. We're seeing kind of the same thing in men being pushed more and more now by the magazines, and particularly with Men's Physique coming out. It's like the exact equivalent of the female waifish model thing being promoted in men, but being pushed in the direction of health because there's a weightlifting and training component involved. And really it isn't healthy, and it's not something we should promote. However, I will state on the other hand that I do believe in freedom. I do believe in people having the right to do with their bodies as they please. So if that's what someone really wants to do to make them happy, that's their choice to make. But I think it's important for those of us who have a voice here publicly in the fitness world that we do point out that there are health risks associated with that, and the mindset itself may not be healthy, and it's something they should consider before they jump headlong into something like that. Because it's exactly what you said. It can cause self-induced anorexia, and people are forcing on themselves through a subculture rather than just having anorexia inherently and developing it. It's a subculture enforcing it, and it is something that people need to be aware of, and it's something that we do need to talk about a lot more as a community, because it is a big deal, and it is becoming a larger and larger problem. All right, next question and last question of the week. Are human beings really altruistic? Yeah, absolutely. Human beings are altruistic, very much so, just like any other species that has pretty much mammals at least, that have either a herd component or a pack component. We're very much a social species, and our altruism has been actually one of the number one reasons we've been so successful in dominating the planet. But what people need to understand is that when you look at the anthropology, you look at the psychology of it, human altruism is based upon perception of your tribe or perception of your pack or whatever. And it doesn't necessarily mean an ethnic component so much as your in-group versus out-group. Like, humans are very, very predisposed to in-group, out-group bias. We are an extremely violent and tribal species also. And so as a species, we tend to be very altruistic towards those we see as being part of our group, whatever that group happens to be. It could be your religious group, it could be your nationality. For some people, it could be their ethnicity, it could be their family, it could be the school that they go to. We, again, tend to, anyone that we see as part of our group, we tend to be absurdly compassionate and empathic towards, compared to a lot of other species. We're absolutely inherently altruistic. We also, as a species, tend to be very altruistic when it comes to the helpless and the children, for the most part, other than our psychopaths, which, going to make up around 3% of the population. The other 97%, though, yeah, we're extremely altruistic towards children, like all through history. And when you look at what we've done, even in tribal settings, when we find a child that the parents are dead or whatever and can't care for it, humans have always historically tended to just take those children and raise them as their own. So when it comes to altruism, we're actually much stronger in regards to that than a lot of other species. There are a lot of other species that are altruistic that will not raise the young of someone not related to them when they find them. Oftentimes they kill them, depending on the species. Some will, but a lot will not. We tend to very much push in that direction. It's almost like automatic in us as a species, until society steps in and you have laws that regulate it. But before that happened, yeah, we tend to just, if we find abandoned children or children with dead parents as a species, we tend to just inherently scoop them up and accept them as our own child. It's like within our nature. But the thing that people need to consider, there is a tribal component to it. When it's no longer children involved, we very much, our altruism tends to be reserved for those that we can relate to on some level, that we see as part of our tribe or our group through whatever social stratification has put them there. And we tend to be less altruistic and sometimes, depending upon the person's situation, completely malicious and dehumanizing towards those who we see as not part of our group. So we have kind of an interesting balance there. But as a whole, are we more altruistic than most other higher mammals? Yes, but most higher mammals seem to have a large degree of altruism compared to other species out there as well. So yeah, humans are very much an altruistic species, and I think it's very characteristic of us as a species as a whole. All right, guys, but that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time.